March 2nd, 1945. A coded message reached the supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The command center sat in the heart of Paris. It was a world of clean maps and polished floors, miles away from the mud and the smell of gunpowder at the front. The transmission was marked for the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. The sender was General George S. Patton, commander of the Third Army. Communication between high-ranking generals follows a strict pattern. It is usually cold and professional. Officers exchange data on fuel reserves, casualty counts, and map coordinates. They stick to the facts. But this dispatch broke every rule of military etiquette. It was short, it was blunt, it contained a level of sarcasm that stunned the Signal Corps. The text read, "Have taken Trier with 2 divisions. Do you want me to give it back?" The staff officers in Paris froze. Some stared at the paper in silence. Others laughed under their breath. Why did the room go quiet? The reason was a previous order. Only hours earlier, headquarters had issued a direct command to the Third Army. The directive was explicit: do not attack Trier. The city was a fortress. Intelligence reports claimed the defenses were too thick. Eisenhower's staff insisted that Patton needed at least 4 full divisions to even attempt a siege. The order reached Patton too late, or perhaps he chose not to see it. By the time the ink was dry in Paris, the battle for Germany's oldest city was already over. Patton had moved faster than the bureaucracy. He ignored the tactical projections. He threw 2 divisions at the target and broke the German lines in a matter of hours. The footage from the era shows the result. Rubble blocks the narrow streets of Trier. American tanks roll past the ancient Roman gate. Patton didn't just capture a city. He humiliated the planners at headquarters. He had rewritten the rules of the campaign. Now, he was waiting for a reply. But this was only the beginning of the friction. Eisenhower faced a dilemma. His subordinate had won a victory by defying a direct command. It was a breach of discipline, but the result was undeniable. In the war rooms of Paris, the maps were redrawn. The city was ours. Patton had proven his point with a single biting sentence. The message was filed away. The war continued. February 1945. This is the story of a single telegram and the impossible battle that preceded it. General George S. Patton was about to break the Siegfried Line. He intended to cross a river of fire. Other generals relied on maps and logistics. Patton relied on instinct. To understand why the assault on Trier was considered suicide, one must look at the Third Army's position. They stood before the West Wall. The Allies called it the Siegfried Line. It was a massive defensive network. Adolf Hitler built it to protect the German border. It was not a simple trench. It was a zone of death miles deep. The line consisted of concrete bunkers and hidden artillery batteries. Engineers had laid millions of mines. Rows of concrete pyramids known as dragon's teeth stretched across the landscape. They were designed to stop tanks. The weather was an enemy. Rain and snow turned the ground into a soup of freezing mud. Tanks sank to their axles. Supply trucks stalled in the slush. Soldiers suffered from trench foot. Most commanders looked at the Siegfried Line and stopped. They demanded air support. They wanted to stockpile millions of shells. They wanted safety. But Patton did not value safety. He saw a detail other generals ignored. The German army was breaking. A defensive line is only as strong as the men inside the bunkers. The German soldiers were exhausted. How did Patton plan to break the stalemate? He didn't wait for permission. He moved. Patton called his corps commander, General Walton Walker. Walker was short, aggressive, and constantly angry. Patton nicknamed him Bulldog. The 2 men met over a map. Patton pointed to the triangle of land between the Saar River and the Moselle River. At the tip of this triangle sat the city of Trier. Trier was a strategic prize. The Romans founded it 2,000 years ago. It was the oldest city in Germany. It served as a symbol of German history. More importantly, it was a vital road junction. It controlled the supply lines heading toward the Rhine River. The footage from the era shows the scale of the obstacle: massive concrete walls, barbed wire, deep mud. Patton looked at Walker. He gave a direct order. He told Walker to punch through. There was no turning back. Thus began the march to the Rhine, February 19, 1945. George Patton pointed to the map and gave the order. He wanted a hole in the German defenses. He wanted the city of Trier. General Walker looked at the objective. The terrain was a tactical nightmare. It was a wall of steep hills, dense forests, and concrete pillboxes covering every road. But Walker was Patton's man. He didn't ask if the mission was possible. He asked when it would start. Patton committed his best unit to crack the Siegfried Line. This was the 10th Armored Division. Their nickname was the Tiger Division. The attack began at dawn. It was not a subtle maneuver, it was a sledgehammer. American tanks roared forward, exhaust smoke filling the cold air. They smashed into the Dragon's Teeth, rows of concrete pyramids designed to stop armor. Combat engineers ran forward. They carried heavy explosive charges under intense machine gun fire. Their job was to blow gaps in the concrete. The sound of explosions was constant. It was slow. It was bloody. German artillery rained down from the high ground. The 94th Infantry Division fought alongside the tanks. They cleared the pillboxes one by one. The footage from the front shows the reality. Soldiers had to crawl to the firing slits and throw grenades inside. They used flamethrowers to burn the defenders out of the bunkers. For 3 days, the battle looked like a stalemate. The mud was the greatest enemy. American tanks slid off the narrow roads into the ditches. At Supreme Headquarters in Paris, the mood was tense. Eisenhower's staff watched the map. They saw the Third Army moving inches at a time. They feared Patton was getting bogged down in a meat grinder. They worried about the rising casualty lists. Staff officers began to draft plans to halt the entire operation. They wanted to shift resources to Montgomery in the north. Montgomery was preparing for his own massive crossing of the Rhine. As usual, he demanded all the supplies, all the shells, and all the fuel. If Patton stalled, Eisenhower would take his gasoline and give it to Monty. Patton knew this. He felt the clock ticking. He wasn't just fighting the Wehrmacht, he was fighting the politics of the Allied command. Patton drove to the front lines. The camera records him standing in the mud shouting at tank commanders. He didn't offer encouragement, he gave an ultimatum. "Keep moving! If you stop, you die! Keep moving!" Then, the line cracked. On February 24th, the 10th Armored Division broke through the main belt of the Siegfried Line. The resistance snapped. Suddenly, the Americans were in the open. The German rearguard collapsed into a disorganized retreat. The Tiger Division raced east toward the Saar River. Trier was now in their sights. Thus, the gateway to Germany was forced open. February 1945. George S. Patton's Third Army moved toward the ancient city of Trier. The Germans did not retreat. They transformed the city into a fortress. High hills surrounded the perimeter. The Moselle River acted as a natural moat. The German High Command issued a standing order. Hold Trier until the last man falls. They didn't just wait. The defenders opened the sluice gates and flooded every low-lying approach. They packed the bridges with crates of high explosives. Allied intelligence units gathered data from the front. The reports were grim. Thousands of German soldiers occupied the buildings. Anti-tank guns were camouflaged within the shadows of the Roman ruins. At Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, the planners analyzed the numbers. Military doctrine for urban combat was clear. To take a fortified city, the attacker needs a 3-to-1 advantage. 4-to-1 is better. Patton lacked the numbers. He had only 2 units in the sector, the 10th Armored and the 94th Infantry. Why was this a problem? Patton was outnumbered. At best, he faced an even fight against an enemy dug into concrete bunkers. Eisenhower's staff saw the danger. They warned that Patton was walking into a trap. They predicted a meat grinder in the narrow streets. The advice was simple: bypass Trier and leave it for the follow-up forces. It was a logical decision. It was a safe decision. Eisenhower agreed and authorized the order. Clerks drafted the message. The text was clear: bypass Trier, do not engage, wait for more troops. But in 1945, communication was slow. The footage from the era shows the process. Radios failed. Clerks had to decode the signal. Typists had to punch the letters onto paper. Motorcycle couriers had to kickstart their engines and navigate muddy roads to reach the front lines. Time was running out. While the message was moving through the chain of command, the situation on the ground changed. Patton didn't wait for permission. He looked at the map and saw an opening. The sound of artillery began to shake the ground. Events accelerated. Patton's tanks were already moving toward the bridges. The couriers were still miles away. The order to stop was in a leather pouch on a motorcycle. The tanks were already in the city outskirts. The gap between the command and the front grew. By the time the courier arrived, the battle was already decided. Thus, the paperwork failed to keep pace with the war. In 1945. General George S. Patton watched the maps. An official order was traveling from Paris to the front lines. It was moving slowly. Patton knew the content of that message before it arrived. It was an order to stop his advance. He sensed the hesitation from the high command. He decided to act before the paper reached his desk. His plan was simple: create a situation that could not be undone. He would present Eisenhower with a finished victory. Patton picked up the phone. He called General Walker. His instructions were brief and direct. Take Trier. Do it tonight, March 1st. The night was cold. The 10th Armored Division waited on the hills overlooking the city. Below them, Trier sat in total darkness. No lights moved in the streets. The German defenders were silent. The commander of the assault force studied the terrain. He faced a tactical crisis. The Moselle River protected the city like a moat. Only two main bridges offered a path for heavy armor: the Kaiserbrücke and the Römerbrücke. The Römerbrücke was a relic of the Roman Empire. It was built in 16 BC. For 2,000 years, it had remained standing. Roman legions had crossed these stones. Medieval knights had used this path. Napoleon's Grande Armée had marched over it. Now, American Sherman tanks were approaching the same arches. But there was a problem. The tanks had only one way in. If the Germans destroyed the bridges, the armor would be trapped on the riverbank. The infantry would be forced into small rubber boats. They would be exposed. The German machine guns would slaughter them in the water. One German officer. He stood in a concrete bunker, his hand resting on the detonator. The wire led directly to the bridge supports. The American plan was simple. It was also incredibly dangerous. They had to rush the city in total darkness. They needed speed to shock the defenders. They had to capture the bridge before the officer could push the plunger. Why take such a risk? The Ludendorff Bridge was the only way across the Rhine. If it blew, the invasion stopped. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Richardson led the charge from the hatch of his command tank. 0200 hours. The American engines roared to life in the woods. They did not use artillery preparation. A barrage would have warned the Germans of the exact location. Instead, they chose silence and speed. They just charged.